Hello, welcome back to Keen Reads, or welcome to Keen Reads. My name is Jared, and today we will be continuing the series that I started last Thursday of going through my bookshelves. So last week I went over just an overview of all four of my standard bookshelves, and then we went in depth over my overflow bookshelf. So today we'll see how it goes, but I would like to get through this whole shelf, and then if we can do that, then maybe we could do a video on each of the other shelves, and it'd be a neat little 5-part series. Just for the sake of time, I'm not going to go too much into the books. If I've read them, I'll talk about them a little bit. As we get into this older stuff, so like I mentioned before, my bookshelves are organized chronologically by date of birth of author. So the purpose of that is really because I wanted to see how literature developed, and we can see as we go through the different ages how things have changed, and I just really like that. I don't know, it just really suits me nicely. I saw it on another channel called Orpheus. He's the one who originally recommended it, and that's where I kind of got the idea from. But first we'll start out with these knickknacks that I have on here. So first we have Sammy. So this is a sloth that I won at Dave & Buster's when I was in pharmacy school. I won him, and I didn't really have a thing for sloths. My favorite animal is the giant panda, like I already talked about, but for some reason my mom got the idea based on this that I just love sloths. So now she buys me a lot of sloth stuff. So you'll see it all over the bookshelves as we go. So here's another sloth. Another one here. And then I do have this helmet here that my brother's in the Navy, and he got this for me when he was in Greece on tour or deployment. And then we just have a highlighter. I have highlighters, pens, and sticky notes all over my library. You might have noticed it in some of my other videos, but I usually also have a picture here, which is a still shot from the movie Spirited Away, which is one of my favorite movies. But I took it down for the purposes of this video because the lamps reflected right into it, and it was kind of distracting. So let's get started on the books themselves. First up, we have the earliest piece of literature that I have, and it's generally considered the earliest piece of literature in general, and that's the Epic of Gilgamesh. I read this a long time ago. The thing that stands out to me the most about it is probably the themes that are repeated in other kind of creation myths. So like there's a flood in it, things along those lines that are kind of repeated in the Bible and elsewhere. I just thought that was interesting that if you get down to the earliest of any real civilization, you kind of break down to the similar themes and stories, which is interesting to me. Next we have some ancient Greeks. So we start with Aeschylus. I was wrong in my other video when I said I read Euripides, Aeschylus, and Sophocles. When I was getting ready for this video, I realized I actually have not read this Aeschylus. So this has the Suppliant Maidens, the Persians, 7 Against Thebes, and Prometheus bound in it. I actually have not read this. The Odes of Pindar, which I have not read either. And then we have 4 plays by Sophocles. So we have Ajax, The Women of Trachis, Electra, and Philoctetes. Again, this is another book that I have not read. I have read the Oedipus cycle by Sophocles, so Oedipus Rex, Oedipus at Colonus, and Antigone. Next, we have 2 books that I've already discussed on this channel that were in my big books that I want to read in this year. So we have The Histories by Herodotus, and then The History of the Peloponnesian War by Thucydides. After that, we move into Homer. So we have the Iliad, which I enjoyed much more than the Odyssey. I think something that I've noticed as I've been thinking back on the books that I've read is that I tend to dislike journey narratives or narratives that have to do with travel and things like that, which as we kind of go through my bookshelf, I think you'll notice that theme. I don't really know why that is. I do like The Lord of the Rings. That's the only real journey that I can think of that really stands out to me that I really enjoyed. So I did like the Iliad, and this is the Robert Fagles translation. And then I have the Odyssey. This is the Robert Fitzgerald translation. We have Euripides, Medea, and other plays. I have read this. I really enjoyed Medea. I can't remember the other plays that are in this one. Another book that I talked about in my first video, which is a book I plan to read this year, which is The Complete Plays of Aristophanes. He. For some reason, whenever I think of Aristophanes, I also think of Sappho, which is weird because they're completely different. Like, one's a playwright and one's a poet. But when I think of Aristophanes, I've read about some of his plays, like The Clouds, I believe, and his portrayal of Sophocles and things like, or Socrates, not Sophocles, that is interesting to me. So looking forward to reading those. Next, we have 2 books of Plato. So we have the complete works of Plato, and then we have 5 great dialogues of Plato. So you'll see these books that look like this. I have 4 of them throughout my shelves, and they were given to me by a good friend of mine. So I have those, even though some of them duplicate what I already have. So I have the complete works here, and then I have some other dialogues that I'm assuming are included in the complete works. I have not read a lot of Plato. I've only read The Republic, which I read in college. But eventually, I plan to take a deep dive into philosophy and kind of go through the philosophers throughout time. I have read A Brief History of Western Philosophy by Bertrand Russell. And I plan on following this plan that Leaf by Leaf actually talks about in his on his channel. He has a playlist going through philosophy and his suggested reading order of kind of getting a good idea of Western philosophy. So eventually, I plan to go through that, but I don't think I'm done with fiction for a while. Similar, now we have Aristotle. I've not read any Aristotle. I have 2 Aristotles here. So I have, again, On Man and the Universe in this edition. And then I have The Rhetoric and the Poetics of Aristotle. Polybius's The Histories. Have not read. Cicero's Selected Works, haven't read. The Gallic War by Caesar, haven't read that. I have read the Aeneid by Virgil, that's what I read last year, and I'm planning on making a video of my 10 favorite books from 2024, and this will be on it. So I plan on talking about this soon. This is the Alan Mandelbaum translation, which you'll notice is also the translation of the Divine Comedy that I have. Last on this shelf, we have 2 Horace books. So we have the Complete Odes and Epods, and then the Satires and Epistles, both of which I have not read. So this top shelf is really ancient Greece and some Latin that I, for the most part, haven't read yet, other than some of the playwrights. Going down to the next shelf, we kind of continue that theme. As we kind of go through my bookshelf, I think you'll see I've read a lot more of the modern stuff than I have of the older stuff. And that's kind of why, if you noticed in my first video, a lot of the books that I want to read this year and my goal are these older books to kind of get some more exposure. So we have Metamorphosis by Ovid, another book that's on my list for this year. Seneca, Letters from a Stoic. Selected Lives and Essays by Plutarch. I don't plan on reading this volume as I have the Thomas North translation, complete translation, that we talked about last video. Epictetus, Discourses or Epictetus, Discourses and Selected Writings. Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. Confessions by St. Augustine. I have read this. I read this in college in the same class that I read The Republic in. Beowulf, translated by Seamus Heaney. I have read this as well. The Song of Roland I've also read. Song of Roland was interesting. It was kind of interesting to see how different literature and writing was back then. There was a lot of repetition. It was told in these tiny kind of paragraph-like chapters, and a lot of them just repeated what was done before it. So it was kind of interesting to see how the idea of narrative has developed since this time. The Divine Comedy, like I said in a previous video, I have read the Inferno, but as I plan to reread this year, I plan to reread the Inferno along with Purgatorio and Paradiso. The Decameron by Boccaccio, which I've read earlier this year. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. The Complete Notebooks of Leonardo da Vinci. I have read about half of this. Actually, no, much less than half. About a quarter of it from where my bookmark is. I think that I'm kind of throwing together some nonfiction books that I could throw to. I'm always thinking about like my next goal and things like that. And I'm thinking next year I'm going to try to check off some of my larger nonfiction books, like some of the, like I have The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, and I'm thinking of throwing this on the list too. I like planning out way in advance of what I'm going to be reading, so that way I usually don't have issues picking up a next book, just because of that. Next we have two smaller philosophy books, The Prince by Machiavelli, and then Utopia by Thomas More, both of which I have read. I actually got this one on my honeymoon. Or no, not on my honeymoon. On the trip where I got married in California. I remember reading this the night before I got married. Don Quixote, one of the first books that I read when I got back into literature. Really enjoyed this. At that time, I really wasn't super into annotating my books, but even this book got a couple. The Fairy Queen by Edmund Spenser, another book that's on my list to be read this year. We'll see how many of these I actually get through. We have Christopher Marlowe's Complete Poems and Translations and Complete Plays. From here we get into my Shakespeare. So I have a couple different versions of Shakespeare. This is a complete works of Shakespeare that I don't read from. But my grandmother was getting rid of a lot of her books once. And I went through her books and pulled this from her shelves. So this is more of a sentimental volume than anything else. I'm going to readjust the camera and we'll continue looking down below. So now we have my next two shelves. This shelf is completely Shakespeare. So I have the Arden Shakespeare, and these are the ones I like to read from. I actually haven't read a lot of Shakespeare. I've read Romeo and Juliet, King Lear, A Midsummer Night's Dream, Hamlet, and Julius Caesar, and that's about it actually. So I still got a lot to go of Shakespeare. But these are the preferred versions that I like reading from. So I've read King Lear from this. I've read Hamlet in the three different versions. So the 1603, 1623, and then this is which kind of like the standard Hamlet, I guess. This is an old copy of Julius Caesar. This is actually the Julius Caesar that I read. This is another one I got from my grandma's shelves. I think it might actually be the oldest book that I have on my shelves. Yeah, 1903. So this is definitely the oldest book that I have. Next we have my Christmas gift that I got last year for my wonderful wife. So these are a complete, not a complete edition, but a large edition of Arden Shakespeare as well. So these are an older edition of these, but I have just a lot of Shakespeare's plays here that my wife got me for Christmas last year. So I just really like the look of these. I don't plan on reading from these again. The reading copies of Shakespeare I plan on getting are these Arden Shakespeare's more modern ones. Going down here, we have a trophy. So I finally finished The Anatomy of Melancholy. I will be talking about it in a wrap-up video, probably in a week or so. But I actually just finished this last night. So that's exciting, because I've been reading this since about mid-January. We have some Milton, of which I've never read any Milton. So we have Paradise Lost, and then Paradise Regained, and Samson Agonistes, as well as some of his shorter poems. We have The Misanthrope by Moliere. I really enjoyed this to the point where I recently found some more that I bought, and I went over them in my previous video. 3 Plays by Racine. So this is Phaedra, Britannicus, and then Andromache. Again, I'm just horrible at pronouncing things. I apologize. Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe. Have not read this. But I do like this edition. It looks almost like an old children's book. copy. Very large text. Then we have a Christmas gift from a couple years ago from my parents, which is Edward Gibbon's The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, all 6 volumes. As I mentioned earlier, I'm thinking this is going to be a 2026 read for me. My dogs are going crazy out there, so if you hear the click-clack of their paws, that's what it is. Boswell's The Life of Johnson, another book that's on my list to be read this year. And then we have Goethe, Faust Part 1, which I did read in college as well. This bottom shelf's a little difficult to film, but I'm going to do my best. So we have Goethe's Faust Part 2. I've not read this. I've never read anything by William Blake. So this is just selected poetry and prose I got from my college's library sale. I think eventually I'll probably get a complete works. Blake is someone who really interests me. I like his paintings, but I've never read anything that he's written. Jane Austen, so we have Persuasion and Northanger Abbey. I have read Persuasion, have not read Northanger Abbey, and I've also read Pride and Prejudice, which I read in high school, but I don't have a copy of that. Complete Poems and Selected Letters of John Keats. Frankenstein, which is one of my favorite novels. This is the unabridged. This is an unabridged version, but it's kind of a school volume, as I read this in AP Literature in high school. Pushkin's Eugene Onegin. This is a novel in verse, which I read last year, and I really liked it. I think a lot of it got lost or not a lot of it, at least some of it got lost in translation, but I still enjoyed reading it. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. I have not read that. I have not read Les Mis by Victor Hugo. We have some Nathaniel Hawthorne. I've really liked Nathaniel Hawthorne from what I've read. So I have The House of Seven Gables and The Scarlet Letter. I've been thinking for a while now about picking up a collection of his short stories. I've listened to the audiobook versions of a couple of his short stories on the History of Literature podcast, and it's kind of given me an itch to read some more of him. Jane Eyre, which I also read in my AP language class, actually, my junior year of high school. I remember the basic plot, and I remember I enjoyed it at the time, so it must be pretty good if I enjoyed it as a sophomore in high school. Or junior in high school? Not a senior in high school, younger than that. Walden and Civil Disobedience. I read part of this, but never got through the whole thing. So that's still on my list. And that's by Henry David Thoreau. Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. This is one of my favorite novels. I almost talked about it in my last video when I was talking about favorite novels. I'm struggling. I'm real struggling. Ivan Turgenev's Fathers and Sons. I remember liking this novel when I read it, but I read it pretty early on in my reading journey, so probably don't have too much to take away from it. We go into some George Eliot. We have Adam Bede, Silas Mariner, and then the only Eliot I've actually read, which is Middlemarch. And honestly, it didn't blow me away. I think I had too high of expectations for it, and it just didn't meet those. Billy Budd and Other Stories by Melville. Similar to Hawthorne, I really like Melville. They're kind of connected in that Melville really idolized Nathaniel Hawthorne. I think he almost stalked him. But love Melville, both his short stories and Moby Dick as well. There's actually one thing in here that I just want to point out because I loved it so much. It's the Encantadas. I believe it's the Encantadas, which he's describing the the Galapagos Islands, and just some real beautiful descriptions of the Galapagos Islands in that. Wrapping things up with my final shelf, I have an old copy of Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman that I got at a flea market. What's in here? Oh, and inside are a lot of my numbers from my collegiate races. Madame Bovary, which I've read. Crime and Punishment, which I have read. I wasn't blown away by Crime and Punishment either, but I did like Notes from Underground. This is actually not the translation that I read. My wife got me this. I read this volume, which also has the double and some other stories. White Knights is in here, other things like that. I liked his shorter fiction better than I liked Crime and Punishment. Now that I've finished Anatomy of Melancholy, I am planning my next big read, based upon my 2025 goal, and it's going to be the brothers Karamazov. So excited to read this one. People say it's his best. I see it mentioned up there with War and Peace and Anna Karenina, which Anna Karenina is one of my favorite novels. Charles Baudelaire's The Flowers of Evil. I've not read this. We have my Jules Verne. I'm not going to take them out, but we have Around the World in 80 Days, A Journey to the Center of the Earth, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and The Mysterious Island. Some just classic adventure stories. Not particularly, nothing stands out from them from the prose, but just exciting, good stories. Haji Murat by Tolstoy. I will be talking about this in that video where I talk about my favorite books from 2024. Then we have War and Peace. Read this in college, not for class, just during my college years. Anna Karenina, which as I mentioned before, is one of my favorite novels. This is Selected Poems and Commentary of Emily Dickinson by Helen Vendler, who actually passed away last year. This is another of my top reads from 2024 that I will plan on discussing in that video. I'm thinking this weekend is when I'm going to do that video. And then lastly on this shelf, we have the start of my Mark Twain. So unfortunately, this is a set. I have like 4 or 5 of these versions, but they just happen to get separated by the bookshelves. And it doesn't bother me enough to make my bookshelves go out of order by date to get them all on the shelves. So this includes Personal Recollections of Joan of Arc, which I've never even heard of actually by Mark Twain. The only Mark Twain I have read is The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. And yeah, that's my first shelf. I'm sitting here really awkwardly, but I hope it was good. I like the idea of this so that way you can get an idea of what I like to read, what I have read, what I haven't. Yeah, I think that's all I got. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.